Hello everyone, my name is Ajay and this is part 8 of Azure Cloud Computing series. And in this series, we are going to discuss about Azure Private Endpoints. Let's try to understand what is Azure Private Endpoints and why do we need it and what kind of problem we are going to solve with the endpoints in your Azure hosted infrastructure. So as you can see the diagram, I have one remote location. This you can take it as an enterprise location, and you have some sort of the connectivity to your VNet, which can be over express route. It can be something on your VPN. So what I'm trying to show here, you have some sort of the connectivity to access your resources, which is hosted on your Azure VNet. So VNet is something a original component, so I'm using a CIDR or CIDR block, which is 10.10.0.0/16. You need to carve a subnet to put some resources inside that particular subnet. So the subnet in this case is going to be 10.10.10.0/24. And this is a VM which I'm going to provision here. Everything is just part of VNet 1. Now, we all know it. If this VM wants to go out, it is going to use a gateway which is going to be the part of your regional services and part of that particular VNet. So there's going to be the route which is pointing towards this gateway, and from here you can go to internet. So all this thing is part of infrastructure as a service. You're going to create your network boundary, you're going to create your resources. It's just the underlay infrastructure that is something managed by your cloud service provider. So this is one of the type of the services. There's another type of services, and that is something platform as a service, which is PaaS. It can be storage, it can be your SQL, it can be Cosmos, and it can be some sort of customized services, maybe a web app. Whenever we provision PaaS, it is not going to have any sort of private IP addresses. It means you're only going to see the public IP address and everything is accessible over the public IP address. For example, if I provision a storage account and I want to use maybe blob services or maybe any other services which is a part of the storage, if I want to connect it from the remote location, I need to use the local internet gateway to reach out to the public IP address. Even from this VM what we created, I want to use storage services. So this VM connects to internet and from there you go to public IP address of the storage. However, Microsoft Azure claims this traffic, it is not going to leave the Azure WAN infrastructure, but ultimately it is all internet traffic. That is something you need to keep in mind. If it is internet, it means security is going to be the major concern for you. So what are the options? So first thing I'm trying to solve here, if this is a gateway service, it might have some sort of limitation that this much traffic can be passed from this gateway. So that's the one limitation. What is the bandwidth you are going to get out of it? And second is going to be the security consideration. So to solve both the problems, Microsoft come up with Azure Private Endpoint. What it mean, all these services, it can be extended to your subnet or VNet. For example, if I want to extend my storage PaaS services, so it is kind of adding a NIC here, and that NIC will take the IP from the subnet. It means it is going to be the part of same VNet. If it is going to take the IP from this subnet, so for example, my VM takes the IP dot 5 and this PaaS service, it takes the IP dot 6. Now we know it is all private IP address communication and the traffic is not going to hit internet WAN links. So security is solved. That is the one thing. And when we come from the remote location, we all know it from here, I can reach out to all these IP addresses. But to reach services on PaaS, it has to go through the internet. So that is also something we need to solve. So when we extend this IP address to dot 6, now it means if my whole subnet and the VNet is reachable from the express route, it means dot 6 is also reachable. Now, if a remote location wants to communicate to dot 6, they can also go over the private link, which is provided by express route, or maybe the VPN is configured. So these are the things which we are trying to solve here, and we'll see in the lab how the whole thing looks like. So to start our lab, the first thing you need is a storage account. So let's try to create a storage account here. This is my existing resource group. However, I have chosen PEP. So that's the resource group I'm going to create here. Then you need to choose the storage account name. You need to choose the reason and performance and your redundancy type. So I'm leaving all these things basically the default. Only thing you need to choose your reason where you want to, or which region basically this account belongs to. Your account name should be there. So let's fill all this information and I'm going to create an account. So my storage account is ready and the name which I have given is strd demo. Deployment is completed. I can go to the resources. There are multiple offerings. So what I'm going to do here, since we are inside the account, and I want to go for the file share. That is the services. I'm going to store the file and all those things. Then ultimately you are going to mount that as a drive on your Windows VM. So go to the file share. I have created a file share with a name pap demo file. Under the file share, I'm going to upload one JPG file, which is going to be the capture.jpg, because that is what I had on my desktop. And you can see the option here, connect. When you click on the connect, basically it is going to give you the option. If you're connecting it from the Windows, this is basically the script you need to run to mount the drive, and the drive later will reflect as D. If you're on the Linux, if you're on the Mac OS, there are different options. Since we are going to do this lab on Windows VM, so I'm going to choose this option. You can see on my Windows VM, I had two drives. One is a temporary storage and another is a C drive. You can go to the PowerShell and from there you can run the script which was reflecting on the Azure console. So I did it and it is telling me the credentials added successfully. And when I do the NS lookup for the account, basically this is the domain name, fully qualified domain name. And this is going to be the account name. This is going to be the services which we are going to use. So if you go for other services, this area will change. Since we are using the file system, so this is the account name, this is the file system, and the domain is going to be the core.windows.net. Now we see a public IP is reflected. If you remember, we discussed earlier also, since we haven't configured private link yet, hence connecting this particular VM to storage account, all my communication will happen over the internet. And that is something expected. Now we can see after running that particular script, there is a file share which got mounted here. When you do the right click on that, you also have an option to disconnect this mount. And when you open this, basically the drive, the file share, we can see the file which I uploaded from the console that is visible here. And this is the drive I was referring is coming as a G. There's another service which is offered by storage is going to be the containers. So this is a blob services. So now I'm going to create a container, and my container, this I call it demo blob, and I gave the read access permission to everybody. Let's create this. I'm going to upload the same file, which is going to be the capture.jpg and my blob location. And once you upload it, it is going to generate a URL for you. It's a public URL. It means it's accessible from the over the internet. So I'm going to use this or open this URL from my machine, which is on internet. The moment I put it in the browser, this page is coming. So it is basically fetching the file which I uploaded from the console. So that tells you this blob image, it is accessible over the internet. When you look into the URL, so this going to my account name. Now it's a blob service. So instead of file, it is telling you this is a blob. And rest of the domain, it remains same. It's a core.windows.net. And this is a folder what we created named as demo.blob. So it is going to follow the hierarchy. This capture.jpg is inside your demo blob. So to access the networking services, this is the storage account name, and you need to go to the networking. So it is going to pop up this page, which is going to be the firewall and virtual networks, private endpoint connections, and custom domain. We are going to focus on private endpoint connections. So inside your storage account under the networking, you can see there is no private endpoint connections because we have not ever created it. So let's try to create private endpoint. You can hit this sign and go next. So when you create the private endpoint, it is going to ask some of the information. So if you recall it, we created a resource group called PEP earlier. Now I'm going to give it a name, PEP demo-1. So it is going to generate a nick card for me, which is going to be PEP demo-1-nick. And the reason is going to be the East US. Next, it is going to ask resource type, and we can see there are multiple type of resources are available. As I mentioned earlier, you can use a file, which I'm going to use in this case. You can go for blob, you can go for table, you can go for queue, you can go for web and DFS. So we'll go for file this time. Let's go to the virtual network. Now it's time to work or associate the virtual network. I already had created a virtual network which is client-group-vnet where I was running the Windows machine, and the subnet is allocated in this case is going to be the 10.50.0/24. I want this endpoint to choose a dynamically allocated IP address from this particular range, and rest of the field I'm going to leave it as a default. Let's go to the next, which is going to be the DNS. DNS integration is going to be very critical component of endpoints. And the reason behind, if you check the NS lookup, it was resolving the name to public IP address. Now we want to use the same name basically and want to get a private IP address. So DNS is going to play a major role here. So when we go to the DNS tab, it is saying integrate with private DNS zone. So we all know it in Azure, it does provide you a private DNS zone. So it is going to create basically a zone. There you are going to have the entries for your endpoints. So we'll choose yes and we'll go to the tags. I will leave tags left to blank and go for review and create, and I can see the validation is passed. However, one thing to be noticed here, the zone which we are going to create, this is going to be the domain name private link.file, since this private endpoint belongs to file services, and then it's going to be the core.windows.net. So it is going to create a zone for you, which is going to be the private to your VNet. Now we can see the private endpoint pep demo-1 is created. The location is going to be the East US. Resource group is pep. And you see multiple options there. You can check the DNS configuration. And you can also see the NIC card, which is associated. Once you click on the NIC card, in this case, it was pep demo-1-nic. We can see there is a private IP address is coming from a range 10.5.0/0/24. So this is the next available IP, which is dynamically assigned to the NIC associated to the endpoint. Now let's take a closer look on the DNS configuration. So click on the DNS configuration, we can see there was a NIC which was associated to the endpoint and has IP address 10.5.0.7, that is something dynamically assigned, and the FQDN for this is going to be strdpepdemo.file.core.windows.net. So this is the account name. Since we are using the file services, hence you can see it, account name and the file. Now the FQDN for private link will look like this. Account name, private link, and it's a file services. This is the zone file, private DNS zone file created when we say integrated with the DNS. So if I go to my Windows machine and do the test again, so this is the previous test. When we were accessing the storage over the public IP address, and let's look up for FQDN, it was returning the public IP address. Now we have created the private link. So when I do the nslookup for the same URL, it is going to return a IP address which is in 10 series. That's a private IP address associated to the NIC of private link. I have now created another private endpoint, and this time is for the blob. So you can see the name I have given to this endpoint is going to be the blob pep. The NIC is generated blob pep-nic. So same steps you need to follow what we did while creating the endpoint for file services. It is going to be the part of the same VNet. So it will take the dynamically assigned IP address from 10.5.0.0/24. And yes, I'm going to integrate it with the DNS. So this time when we integrate it, you can see the DNS zone name gets changed. It's going to be the private link.blob instead of file. So let's go ahead and create it. Now this time when I open the same URL for blob file, it is opening. However, we need to ensure we are not hitting the public IP address. So we can test it from the NS lookup. So this time when I do the NS lookup for this URL, it is going to return me the private IP address, which is assigned to private link on the blob site. That means whenever you're going to open the URL, you're going to hit the private IP address instead of the public. So far, it might sound that this is a very simple concept, but it gets complex when you have some sort of the DNS services which is sitting on-prem, and you might have another VNet, or maybe you want to have some sort of the peering here. So we will discuss how it works, what kind of the complication it can add when you might have some sort of AD running over here that also serves you the DNS services.
Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.